What is up, guys? In today's video we're going to be talking about the Fire Sprite because Fortnite secretly changed how this sprite works and it's a lot better now. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, find it helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you would like to see more, comment down below if you're going to be using the Fire Sprite after these changes, and if you guys would like to use my code in the shop when getting anything. It is EvolvedJake, just like my channel name is, and it is underneath the webcam at all times. So at the start of the season, the way the Fire Sprite worked is after you dealt enough damage to the enemy, it would basically spawn fire underneath the enemy, and then if they sat there, they would take damage from the fire, obviously. And there were definitely times where this could be useful, especially if the enemy was like next to their teammates and you'd be able to damage multiple people, or maybe in something like a bush, because then you could like damage the bush or force them out. But oftentimes it really wasn't that great. For starters, a lot of people this season especially, they're all over the place. People are rarely sitting still when fighting, and a lot of fights this season happen in the air, especially because of the shock rocks, but even things like shockwaves, overdrive nades. There's a lot of in-air combat that happens this season, and in that type of situation, the Fire Sprite would be useless, and those are often going to be like the really important fights. In close range fights, if you're trading shotgun shots with an enemy, you could maybe negatively impact yourself because of the fire that you would spawn on the enemy. And then this could also make looting enemies that you eliminate somewhat inconvenient, because you eliminate someone, you want to go grab their loot, and then there's fire on the ground and you have to wait for that fire to leave to get the loot you want. And if there's something important in that pile you need, like heals or mobility, that little bit of time that you waste waiting for the fire to go away could have griefed you. So the Fire Sprite was not something that most people seemed to enjoy early on in the season, and while Epic was on break, they basically disabled the effect of the Fire Sprite due to a bug. I don't know what the problem was, but there was some problem, and when they were on break they couldn't actively fix it, so they just made the amount of damage required to activate the Fire Sprite basically infinite, so it would never actually activate. And now it has been reworked to just give the enemy a burst of fire damage immediately once you've done enough damage threshold. So you get extra damage and don't have to worry about the enemy evading it or it negatively impacting you in some way, because it's just an immediate burst of damage. It's not a pool of fire that sits on the ground. It's just basically extra damage, and the damage threshold to trigger the effect starts out at 150 damage for level 1, and then it decreases by 25 damage for each level. So at level 5 you only need 50 damage on the enemy to trigger the effect of a level 5 Fire Sprite. So it's going to be happening very easily at the early stages. It's not that great. 150 damage is the fight is almost over by that point. But the way the sprites work in Fortnite, it's very easy to get through like the early levels, and so oftentimes it's going to be probably like 100 or less damage that you actually need to trigger the effect. And the damage you get from the effect is only 12, which doesn't sound amazing, but any extra damage you get on an enemy can be a game changer in some fights. I'm sure we've all had those moments where you or an enemy survive with barely health remaining. Like you might get eliminated and you're like, wow, I had that guy on 5 HP, I should have won that. The Fire Sprite, would have made you win that in those instances. Or on the flip side, you might, have a fight where you survive with barely any health and you're like, that was a close one, I probably should have lost. And if they had the Fire Sprite, maybe you do just end up losing in those situations. There's a lot of close fights or fights where someone barely survives with any HP left, where 12 can actually be somewhat of a difference maker. But also a lot of fights this season involve enemies running away, especially because of these shock rocks. If you get someone weak, they're immediately shock rocking away. And in those situations, that 12 damage can actually save you a lot of effort and a lot of trouble. You just don't waste as much time potentially. It does seem like there is a cooldown effect for this, fire burst to actually happen. So it's not like every 50 damage you're getting a 12 additional. That would actually be pretty good, and it would add up pretty quick, especially at level 5. But it seems like there is some degree of a cooldown. I've been told the cooldown does decrease as you level up the sprite. So at the higher levels, not only is it going to activate earlier because you require less damage, but also maybe the cooldown, happens. And in a lot of fights this season, it's just done and dusted. One player eliminates the other. But there's also a lot of fights, like I touched on, where people are using mobility. They're running away. They're flying through the air. And in those type of fights, things tend to go a bit longer. And that, gives more potential for you to trigger this effect multiple times if the fight is going longer. And as I already said, those are typically going to be the more important fights this season. The better players that you fight this season are probably going to try to escape and not just let you eliminate them. And so you have, the opportunity to trigger this effect multiple times. And again, 12 damage doesn't sound amazing, but the visual effect from the enemy's POV when this happens can also be really confusing. I'll try to find an example of this happening to me. I don't run into many players using the Fire Sprite, so I don't know if I'll be able to. But basically, the flames, there's like flames on your screen and like wasps on your character for a few seconds when the Fire Sprite, burst damage happens to the enemy, not the person using it. And so if you're playing against somebody who has the Fire Sprite and all of a sudden there's just wasps and fire on your screen, I feel like that could be kind of confusing and something that can throw the enemy off if they aren't used to playing against the Fire Sprite, because like I said, a lot of people don't know that this got reworked, and a lot of people don't use the Fire Sprite, so your enemies aren't going to be encountering this very frequently, and they're not going to be like accustomed to just immediately knowing, oh, that was the Fire Sprite. Just making the fight more weird for your opponent and make them think like, what the heck just happened, why is that on me, is something that can throw the enemy off and make the fight easier for you, especially when it is a chaotic fight. If you just get up on somebody's face and you're spamming your shotgun on them, and then all of a sudden they're taking a bunch of damage by somebody that caught them off guard, and there's a bunch of wasps on their screen randomly for a few seconds, that every little bit of inconvenience you can cause the enemy is something that can, add up in your favor. Especially at the higher levels, it's going to happen really early on in the fight. Like if you have a level 5 Fire Sprite, it's going to happen from only 50 damage. So your first shotgun shot is probably going to trigger the fire effect. And the moment the fight starts, the enemy is going to be not only taking damage, not only in a fight, but also have a bunch of crap on their screen that, potentially makes them think about what that even is or confuses them. And like I said, at level 5, it's only 50 damage. So that's going to be your first shotgun shot. At level 4, 75 damage. Probably still going to be your first shotgun shot or just a few pistol shots. So at the higher levels, it's going to be happening very frequently or very early on. And that extra bit of confusion is something that I feel like adds more value if it happens earlier on in the fight. If they're basically dead anyways and then it happens, and like who knows if it really affects the fight. But I do think early on, the visual impairment that this causes is something that can, make the fight weird for your enemy and throw them off in a way that they might not be used to. And overall, this isn't going to be the greatest sprite in the game. This isn't like, oh my god, use the Fire Sprite, you're going to win every game if you do it. I actually did have a lot of success using it. The day I used the Fire Sprite to get gameplay for this video, I think I lost 3 games in total that entire day. It is good and better than you would expect. 12 damage doesn't sound like a lot on paper, but it's also something that's very common and very cheap. So if you don't have a sprite, the odds of you finding a Fire Sprite during the match is decently high because it's a pretty common sprite. Or if you want to bring something in but you don't want to spend dust, it's only 100 dust to buy back the Fire Sprite. So it is very cheap and it's very common, and that makes it useful, in situations, like I said, where you don't have a sprite or you don't want to spend dust to bring something expensive in. Go ahead and bring this Fire Sprite in. It'll give you a small little benefit in a fight and potentially throw your enemy off and be something that can really confuse them. And I feel like that's going to be where this sprite is best, in those situations where, you're trying to use something cheap or you're already in a match and don't have something yet, and then you happen to find this. Previously in the season, it would be something that I would just ignore. I would rather have nothing than have this because I don't want a bunch of fire on an enemy's loot after I eliminate them, especially if we're getting third-partied. But now, I think it's actually pretty solid, and it doesn't really inconvenience you at all if you're using it. And so, even if the benefit isn't that high, it's still a nice little benefit to have. And something that's kind of hard to measure in terms of like it's hard to know how much you actually inconvenience somebody with the fire or how thrown off they personally are by it. But I do think it is something that can, add up in a fight. Like I said, it's not the greatest. I think at the start of the season, I probably would have put this like D tier or F tier, or E tier. It's something that I'm just not using. And then now it's probably, B minus tier. It's not the greatest thing in the game, but it's certainly better than nothing, and it's not negatively impacting you anymore. So that is going to be it for this video. As always, if you guys did find this to be helpful, informative, or interesting, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, comment down below if you've been able to use the reworked Fire Sprite and what you think, or if you are going to use it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.